I cried my eyes out during the whole event. Like every time when Sadhguru raised the energy in the room, it just broke me open, and I could only do was cry. It literally felt like my spiritual body like dragged me along the road, and my ego was just like, oh my god, what happened?
In today's episode, we will talk to Jos, a former journalist and a copywriter who left his flourishing business in search of Zen. His exploration of spirituality first led him to a Taoist view of sexuality and then later into Isha Yoga, where he experienced an immense growth in his spirituality. Enjoy the show. Namaskaram, Josh. Welcome to Zen Mind.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Definitely, there are so many things happening around the world today with COVID, and I reflect back at that time. If I did not have the practice of meditation, it would have been difficult. And so I want to definitely talk about how the practice of meditation has actually helped you cope up with all the challenges which we have today in the world. But maybe perhaps we can start talking about you a little bit. Tell me a little bit about you. Where did you grow up?
My name is Jos. I'm from Holland originally. I grew up there. My family wasn't particularly spiritual or religious. I would say that spirituality didn't really have a integrated place in our family. Even though my mother was spiritual, I found out later she was doing like lots of personal growth work, but also Tantra like
Really?
courses. Yes, as a kid, I always found that really suspicious. I was like, what is going on there? Every time when she had like a course, a weekend course, like, why are you going and who are these people? As a kid, I definitely felt there was some intensity around that topic.
Right.
Later, I understood more about what it was. Obviously, Tantra for a lot of people is obviously they associated with sexuality, but it was more about personal growth as a whole.
Yeah.
Sexuality was definitely also a part of it, but I had interesting conversations later on in my life with my mother about it. And yeah, interestingly enough, when I was around the age of like 15, 16, my mother started to give me spiritual books. She gave me The Alchemist from Paulo Coelho, which is one of my favorite books of all time. But at the time, I couldn't see the value of it yet. Yeah, so she was giving me like little hints, spiritual hints, trying to somehow ignite something in me, and I wasn't ready to receive those hints.
Yeah.
I became a marketer and a copywriter, and for my copywriting gigs, I interviewed a lot of people, and I had this one interview that I would do regularly for one magazine, and I would interview public speakers. And that was a super good like undercover way for me to find inspiring people and start having conversations with them. And at that point, I think I was looking for success, just a Western idea of like, how can you be productive? How can you be successful?
Right.
And so I started interviewing people who had made it in that area, from people like in the entertainment industry, but also the general of the Dutch army, for example, or even the vice president of NATO, who was a Dutch guy at the time. And so I had this opportunity to interview these people. And I was very young still, like 18, 19, 20. And I always asked them, like, what is your drive? Why do you do what you do? What is your message? And there was always something inspiring to learn from these people. But also, I also found myself a little bit disappointed, usually after an interview, because I had this projection about like that these people would have the answer, And then they turned out to be really normal people with just usually a very specific path they like pursued in life and became successful because of a certain set of habits, for example. But I think I was looking for something deeper. So the image of success evolved more and more during my years, um, and it became more of a spiritual concept during the years. From like I want to have a business with passive income. I want to be successful. I want to be a public speaker. I want to have X amount of followers. I want to write a book before I'm 28. Like all these things. Um, and some of these things happened and they were fulfilling in its own way. But also I started to understand that I was looking for something else, which I didn't have the words for. And then at some point when I had a crisis about this, like when I felt that what I was doing wasn't satisfying me anymore. I had two businesses at the time and one with a friend, and I woke up one morning and I went to him and I said, like, I can't do this anymore. And we were in the middle of a big project, and I felt my soul, even though I wouldn't call it my soul, was going in a different direction than I was moving. So I told him I can't do it anymore. I gave him basically the business because I was too burned out basically to do it in a very uplifting, creative, constructive way. So just like I need time, space. And that was the moment when my transformation started, I guess, because then someone recommended me meeting a Taoist teacher. I did Taoism from China. There was a teacher in Amsterdam who had studied in China a lot and was teaching in the Netherlands. And someone recommended me meet this guy. And they told me as well, watch out though, because he has a reality distortion field. That's literally what this guy said. And I was a little bit wary, like, but at the same time, like, that might be what I am looking for, actually. So when I met that spiritual teacher, the Taoist teacher, I remember when I shook his hand and he sat me down, and that was already a surprise. I thought we would just meet and like I would, it would just be me observing him a little bit or whatever, and then I would go. But it was intense immediately. Like he had this whole different intensity around him. So he sat me down and he started talking about this whole different paradigm, different worldview, about basically about the whole energetic realm of existence or the non-physical realm of existence. What he called it back then, he said, like, you need to train. If you want to make something out of your life, you need to train, you need to practice. So he gave me basically like painted a picture of what the Taoist practice in his view looked like. And interestingly enough, sexuality was a big part of that in the beginning already. He said, like, if you want to grow as a human being, you need energy and you need to go back to the source. Where did you come from? Sexuality. Mm-hmm. And sexuality in a more abstract sense, like the whole world is a sexual manifestation. Everything is two opposite forces coming together, creating this third miracle. Mm-hmm. And you're a part of that. So yeah, he gave me techniques to practice that by myself. It wasn't like partner work or whatever. It was just how to harness sexual energy, how to grow in that way. Mm-hmm. Qigong. So yeah, that was my start.
Do you still practice the Taoist way?
Yes, not as intense as I did the last 10 years. It was really my main path. I would say that yoga now is my main path.
Okay.
Yeah. But there are
and so
that I still practice that support. Mm-hmm. I also feel now my yogic practice.
Right. I mean, that is very interesting because that actually happened with me as well, right? There is this intense longing which makes us keep searching for things, and then and that becomes the stepping stone. Basically, it leads you away into your spiritual growth, right? So your Taoist way was the first step. It says, oh, there is a potential on this, right? And then you practice it for 10 years and you say, okay, I'm ready for the next step, right? And that's when your longing sort of intensifies. And so I'm kind of curious to hear your thought. Like, how did you switch from Taoism to yoga? And was there a reason behind it? Were you Hmm.
Yeah, interesting question. I'm still figuring that out actually. I feel that the transition started 2 years ago, and still I'm like, what happened? And are the things that I did before that gave me so much growth, are they not right anymore? Or like, it's weird, I think, to really transform and then to feel that some things that might have been the right thing for you in the past are not working anymore. And that doesn't mean that they're bad in its own. But that was a whole process around like, oh, did I do the wrong things? Like, was I just blind? And yeah, what it sparked. I was 2 years ago. I lived in London, in the UK, and I don't. I think I was following Sadhguru through YouTube or something. It was like he was in my field of awareness, but in a very like the corner, of it. And he was saying some things that would contradict some things that I would do, so that was hard. And but still, I felt like there's something there. There's something there. There's something there. So I kept watching, and at some point, I saw that he was in London doing the inner engineering program. And I thought like, oh, well, it's so close, it's an opportunity. Why not just check it out? But literally with the attitude of like going to a lecture, or like if I don't like it, I can just get up and move out. Not knowing Isha yet because they're very thorough. So I went there and I just walked into basically in an initiation, like the Shambhavi Mahamudra initiation, and I had no idea what that was. I had no idea that that was going to happen. And yeah, Isha is so well organized, so they organized it in such a way that there was no way for me to like just get up in the middle of a lecture and move out. So I realized slowly, hour by hour, like, oh, I'm in something serious. Like I'm in something really transformational. And I had so much resistance. I was the first day I was only looking like, how can I get out of this without losing too much faith? And and slowly, yeah, I just like Sadhguru had me, like I opened myself more and more. I cried my eyes out during the whole event. Like every time when Sadhguru raised the energy in the room, it just broke me open, and I could only do was cry. And yeah, I finished the thing, got initiated in Shambhavi, and 2 days later, I was home sitting there, and I felt like, oh my god, I changed, and it literally felt like my spiritual body like dragged me along the road, and my ego was just like, oh my god, what happened? And I did Shambhavi, the practice, for like a couple of days, maybe 2 weeks, but it was way too intense for me or something. I needed to slow down the transformation. So I kind of blocked it. I did a little bit of the Upa yoga, the exercises, and then kind of like made it more of a mental connection again. So if I'll just look at videos of Sadhguru, I'm also growing. And kept going that way until I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I am now. Um, and I don't know, something like it was almost like the seed had been planted and it was growing and growing and growing. And all of a sudden I realized I think I have been given something that is so valuable, and I think I just like put it away, and I think it's time now to really accept the gift. And that's when I did the online inner engineering, and now I'm really practicing for 6 months now every day, and it's doing miracles. So I'm on the path now there.
The mind, rather, is constantly evaluating what it knows the best, right? What it knows. And it's accumulated knowledge. And so it's trying to, it's not wrong, but that's what it's trained for. So it's always evaluating what it knows right and what is wrong based on whatever limited knowledge it has. And what trumps in situation like yours is the body, which is more experiential, which is beyond just the brain. It's your whole body. Like especially when you say that, there is a sort of force, or you could call it a fate, or you could call it destiny, that somehow, even though you were not 100% sold on it, you go and sign up and you go and sit there, and out of respect or even awkwardness, you can't get up, and then you end up, experiencing what he is sharing. And then before you know it, you have an experience which you can't deny and which is beyond your brain and your mind, because it can't process, because it didn't even have time to evaluate if Sadhguru is right for you or not. But your body is experiencing ecstasy. And here your mind is saying, I don't understand what the heck is going on, but your body is feeling, like calm and ecstatic. And there is a fight. And then I think it takes a little bit of time. To your point, you go back and say, what in the world just happened to me? I felt great. And it sort of sinks in, right? Now the body is influencing the mind and the mind is influencing the body. Now there is sort of like a union which is probably started happening, right?
Yeah, I totally recognize what you're saying, especially that union. It's like the first part of my search was like there were all these elements of me looking for answers, but they weren't unified, they weren't integrated. And that's what's starting to happen, and that's what accelerates the path, or my path, so much at the moment. And that's also what Sadhguru talks about. I think I heard him say about, like, it's not about capability. We can give you capability, like we can teach you things, but if you want to move forward, it's about integrity of emotions, of the body, of the mind. Those things align, then you become this smooth force. And yeah, I'm so grateful that that landed. And I feel so, like that realization that you described, that your mind, like the mind is so clever in its own way, but it's so not all encompassing. So it's so limited in another way. And every time I figure that out for myself, when I think I get something, and then something else bigger opens up, and I'm like, oh my God, I know nothing. It's a humbling but beautifully liberating process, right?
That is absolutely spot on. And I think especially for listeners or viewers who are listening to this, it is important to understand that one is definitely evaluate and research as much as you want to do it, but there is absolutely no comparison for something which is experiential. It's very difficult. Now, Sadhguru, as I always say, that he's not a easy peasy guru. Like, he's not the one who's going to be appealing to you all the time. His mission is to arouse you. And so he challenges your intellectual ability, your logical sense. So he comes out and hits you hard. And maybe that is his way of really having a conversation with him, because my conversation with Sadhguru was very similar. When I say conversation, it's my internal dialogue, is to like, oh yeah, I don't understand, maybe this doesn't appeal to me, but by just doing that, now I'm engaged in a conversation with him, and now I'm looking for more evidence. And so because I did not agree to him, I watch more videos, and then I'm like, oh, huh? What? Really? And so I'm more hooked on, right? So he's slowly reeling me in by saying something very controversial. I'm like, okay, I don't understand. Now he brings you closer, and then you go through one of his programs, and then, bam, you have this experience which is beyond mind, and it's all body. And now you can deny the fact. It's not a mental game anymore. It's real. It has sinked in. And now as the union becomes very easy, because now I was reading, I think it in one of his books, when he said, your mind always lies to you. Your brain always lies. But your body always tells you the truth. And I think this is what Buddha also said it. Like, if you are paying more attention to your body, your whole body sort of vibrates according to the things which are around you. And so, very experiential. right? So I think that is the crux here. Like, don't stop. Take a program. It's okay to have a little dialogue, mental debate, but just get over the mental debate just for the heck of it. Do one of his programs, right?
Totally. And my experiences with those debates is that they get more intensified whenever I reach a point of breakthrough. So if I do my practices, you're building energies, you're transforming your body, your energy bodies, etc. But then obviously you're gonna hit blocks and spots where I've been clinging on to. Like I felt safe with this pattern for so long, and now I'm like breaking it. And then zip 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 the mental chatter intensifies, and because it's just like screaming for like it's looking for reasons not to go through that or something. It's so connected to that survival instinct or the safety feeling, and it's hard for me to like. I know that that pattern happens again and again and again and again. I've been watching it happen now so many times. When I'm in it, I still find it hard, um, even though I know like there's no reason for me, for example, on this random Tuesday morning to be totally anxious about life, but I just did my practice. So probably what I did is I'm touching something that's already in me and I'm breaking through it, but it doesn't make the feeling less anxious. So there's this constant breakthroughs in my experience of these steps, and when I'm through it, there's a sense of humor to it almost. It's like beautiful, and there's tears or whatever. There's this sense of liberation, but also a smile, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how could I have limited myself so much and be so attached to that limitation that I was so scared to let it go.
Yeah, it is. Do you do journaling? Okay, so I mean, I wish I could have started very early on. I was talking to one of my colleagues here, and he has been journaling for 20 years, maybe, or 20 or 30 years. Um, the one thing which is very humbling, especially when you journal, is that when you look back at a particular scenario, and then you realize that why was I thinking that way, and when you reflect back, and then you almost have sort of that attitude of, oh my God, I was so naive that I got so caught up into small little thing, but now I'm in a better state. Now I'm in a better, you know, space, and now I see clearly. And so that constantly keeps happening, right? At every stage, like from like when you're 10, maybe small little petty things bother you, and then you're distressed and you're sorry, and then you feel sorrow and sad. All the emotions are real, but the things are petty. Like, oh, somebody did not give me or invite me to a birthday party, I'm sad. Okay. And then emotions are real. And you go through that suffering. And then suffering is real. But the issues are petty. But the question is at what time the petties are worth the sorrow. And no, in the whole life, it's never a time where you feel that that requires you to be sad and sorrow, because you come out of it and you reflect like, yeah, it's all right, it's not a big deal. And so the growth, the spiritual wisdom is constantly growing.
Yeah. And what is interesting, if we look at other people, we can see that so clearly. Like if you would have a hard time with some emotion about work, I'm not in your situation. I don't have your job. I don't have the same feelings around it. So I can just see like, oh, well,
Yeah.
like it's just a minor thing. Like you're so
Yeah.
much more than that. But in our own perception, it's like it can literally hijack our whole perception, and that's what these practices are doing for me. That hijacking part becomes way less compulsive. So it's like, oh, okay, something is trying to hijack my whole perception. But wait a minute, I'm also this. I'm more than just my body. I'm this, and then all of a sudden it becomes so much wider. And then you can even do like a practice that we did at Isha, like Bhakti Sadhana, for example, just where you bow down to everything basically, and accept that you don't even know how a grain of sand came to be. Like everything's a miracle, and then all of a sudden when you're connected to that miracle, then you think like, oh, maybe my job is not so big.
We were talking about perception, right? I mean, perception is what creates the reality. It's not the reality itself. And each one of us have a different perception of the world. And then what you were talking about is that how your perceptions, how you were basically, how you became mindful of the perceptions because of the inner engineering. So tell me a little bit about that side of the story. Like, what are you experiencing with inner engineering?
Yeah, so much. Inner engineering program has different, I think seven lessons that you go through, and almost seven big realizations. And I think one of the biggest ones for me was that Sadhguru speaks about that you're responsible for basically everything in his words. And that was so hard for my mind to hear, because there's so many connotations to that word, being responsible, like feelings of guilt, or feelings that I'm not adequate, or feelings that I need to do something, or the weight of the world on my shoulders, and but for him to explain, and I can't do it as well as him. He spends like 30 minutes explaining, is so nuanced. But I'll try my best. But that it doesn't mean that you're responsible. That in the sense that everything in the world it should be on your shoulders. But in a way that, like, are you alive enough to have a conscious response to everything that happens in the world around you? So, or are you just so I don't know, like, maybe if I give an example, maybe 10 things are happening in my life, work things, things in my private life, all these things, like this whole, you can make a list of responsibilities, from fixing the roof of your house to writing this report at work to calling your mother. Like, they're all like these things that come at you or something. That's how it feels. And my response was like to just ignore half of them. So the things that were inconvenient, I ignore. So they're out of my perception. And Sadhguru invited me basically to, like, no, allow them in your perception, and like all as many as you can, and then make a conscious reaction to it, response. And that doesn't mean that you have to call your mother, but it can mean that you're consciously not calling your mother, which is 10 times better than ignoring it. So that was a huge change in my perception. Another one that comes by in the inner engineering course is like, you are not your body, you are not this mind. So the daily experience for me was, I think, 80% ruled by my body. Like, just compulsions about food, sleep, going to the bathroom, but also if I would work, like, I would send a few emails, but then all of a sudden there's this harder email. My body would just like, nah, that will save for later. That's too complex. And I could just feel like my body is just protecting me from, like, no, I don't want to spend energy on this complex topic. We don't have an answer yet. Just block it. So my body was ruling, like, totally the ruler of my life. And then I had the mind, which was almost the other 20%, I guess. With all the chatter and the opinions and the rationales and whatever. And by becoming way more orderly, I would almost say, like Sadhguru, like, gives you tools to experience the body in one way, to experience the mind in one way, your emotions in one way, your spirituality in one way. And these become almost like, I can look at them now, and they become in balance, they become harmonized more. And so I would also say, in terms of perception, like, my perception for what is beyond the body and beyond the mind has become way bigger and more stable and way more present, just in general.
I love that when you said about the responsibility, and your perception getting, you being more sensitive, right, to things. And that reminds me of Sadhguru's, when he talked about responsibility is ability to respond. And so it is It is, in fact, it's not making you crippled. In fact, it's making you more powerful, because now what you were running away from is now an ability, not a disability. That's an ability to respond to things which are happening. So I can absolutely relate to that. And in fact, that was an aha moment as well for me. Like responsibility, looking at it completely different. So get as much as you can. When you have all the variables, now you decide, because now it's your ability to decide what path you're going to choose, or how you're going to deal with that particular scenario instead of running away from it. You are more in the center, and make that decision with all the things in mind. That is a very powerful statement.
Yeah, so powerful. I think one of the most controversial and most powerful that Sadhguru offers, and that people take the longest for to digest and really accept. And I guess it's a process for me also still.
Yes. And I think that's what leads to what you were talking about, perceptions. Because if perceptions are sort of experiences through mind, body, and several layers of body, let's say ethereal body and spiritual bodies, if you have to be sensitive to those, you first need to be open-minded for them to actually come into your awareness. And by not being aware of it and by blocking those, you would never be sensitive, right? And so that's how the perception sort of grows, because what I blocked before, that was never in my awareness, because I lifted the block and I said it's my responsibility. Now that is coming into my awareness, because it is coming into my awareness and I'm making a conscious decision on top of it. Now my perception is increasing, because now I'm aware, oh, this is also an ability. This is also a variable. This is also I can do. Now I'm becoming more aware of all the possibilities. And that is providing you some kind of a experience which is beyond just the mental ability.
The mental blocks that we have just completely shield us from that experience that you're describing, of the sensibility of all these other layers of reality. And what for me was such a game changer was that spiritual growth for me was like became it was my passion, but also it was a painful process sometimes. Like there were a lot of bumps in the road, and I would like have a breakthrough, but then a huge setback, and it was really bumpy. And when I heard Sadhguru speak about like that spiritual growth for a lot of people is a painful process, and that is just because it's there's not a smooth alignment of everything that you are. And if you align that spiritual process actually can become joyful and really ecstatic and pleasant. That was a total brainwave that was like, could that be true? Like, is it? And yes, and that relates to what you're saying for me, that like if your spiritual body, for example, is if you don't experience your spiritual body, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It's still doing its thing, but you're not aware of it, and it can be doing something different. You're trying to go left and it's going to go right, and all this friction in you happens all the time, and you don't even know that you're the cause of your own friction. So by removing these blocks and aligning these things more, it becomes more joyful and more easy. And what Sadhguru says, like there's a necessary lubrication, even like there's this smoothness around you, like life starts to align up. There's these synchronicities happening, and yeah, of course they're happening because your spiritual body is involved with that. So you know, that's one of the true blessings I feel that he offered me as a teacher, and as his teachings. Like whoa, and that's also, now I'm speaking about it, that I would want to say to all spiritual seekers that it doesn't have to be painful. It can be blissful. Of course, there will be challenges, but everything you do joyfully, even a challenge you can do joyfully, and it's not that far away. Like it's actually more it feels supernatural, because if you are aligned with yourself and all these things fall into place, you feel like, oh, this is actually how it's supposed to work. And then so many things make sense, and also so many things don't make sense. So a lot of spiritual paths are built on missing this idea, and they're built on suffering. Like in Christianity, obviously there's a lot of, I'm not saying that that would be like, if you would go to the people who would have the real consciousness, or even Jesus Christ, I don't think he would agree with loads of things how Christianity is now experienced. But I had a little bit of that I thought suffering was good. Suffering is what makes me hard and goes on and like grow and stuff. And to turn that around to like, yeah, well, life will give me my share of challenges. I don't have to look for them.
That is the most important thing, right? You don't have to look for them. As long as you have the tools to cope up with those, and that's what Sadhguru teaches, right? He gives you the tools through sadhana, and then you can make use of that to become more sensitive. I want to talk a little bit about what you said earlier about your experiences. Is there an experience you could share with us, especially doing either inner engineering or 21 day sadhana, or any other programs have you done so far with Isha?
Those are the two, actually. Yeah.
Okay. So is there an experience you want to share?
um yeah, so the first experience that I already shared was the immense resistance, where this high vibration of or love broke through me, and I opened up. That was a big experience. That was truly life changing. um and another one was during the 21 day sadhana, where we had the privilege of being in a consecrated space. So we were in Mahima Hall, which has been consecrated by Sadhguru. And I was very curious what that would feel like to be in an energized space, and what that would do, you know? And when I came in, I was already like, ooh, this feels rich. There was a very rich feeling in there or something. And on a level that's maybe not physical. So that's again the sense. If you're sensitive, all of a sudden you can feel things happening, perception. And it was really interesting because Sadhguru was not there. He was on a book promotion tour through the USA, and I was hoping, and I had a lot of people with me, that he would be back in time to somehow also be in person there at the 21 day program. But like that was like a thought I had like the first 2 or 3 days, but then it just completely disappeared, because it was like I was in a very intimate, intense interaction with Sadhguru all the time. And I slowly understood, like, wow, being in that consecrated space, doing the practice that we did, being very perceptive. Then what he says as well, he's like, it's not the matter if I'm there. Are you there? That's what he says. Like, are you present? My presence is not the problem, he says, but are you present? And that's what I experienced there. Like, if I was present, it was literally like having a private guru sitting behind me, and it was building up, and I had these breakthroughs and moments. And the last evening, I had a hard time in the meditation, and something happened on a very spiritual level that I find hard to put in words, but it literally felt like Sadhguru helped me going through something that was like, had the potential to be like a karmic blockage for lifetimes, and it was solved. And I still feel so grateful for that. And I don't know how it works. How can a guru be everywhere? um, but it was very tangible. And what you're saying, like in the mind, it's like you can ask so many questions, but in my experience, it was so real, and it still is so real. So I'm just like, okay, I'll just accept that gift, and I'm just grateful. So that was another experience of like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? To your point, it's very hard to put words to an experience which you had, because all of the programs are experiential. And to your earlier point as well, what Sadhguru teaches is not spirituality as it normally misunderstood. He teaches life. He teaches how to live life, how to live life joyously. And so he definitely has a very different way of teaching, and his methods are very experiential. So it's very, very helpful. Is there anything which you would like to share which I have not covered?
Maybe one last mind, like transformative thing that helped me on this path. I just remembered that in the beginning I was doing my spiritual path to find happiness. And Sadhguru put it in such a way that I understood, like, no, don't look for happiness. Happiness is the baseline. It's the prerequisite for life. Life is not about finding happiness. You should make yourself in a very blissful, happy state, and then your life will be an expression of your happiness. And that was like, whoa, okay, that's quite a different approach. And I now get that, and I also think like I'm even more patient with with entrepreneurial things. I'm like, can I do this really joyfully? If not, then it's not my time yet. And then I'll just focus on my practices, and I just want to do the things that I can do in a happy state, and I express that happiness, and that's what I want to bring into the world. And yeah, maybe that's something I would love to tell everyone. I want to scream it off the rooftops, like, guys, stop looking for happiness. Yeah, totally.
No, that is very good. So, last question. What would you tell people who are still debating, who are still on the fence, like, should I do this or not? What would be your advice or suggestion?
I would go by what the deeper force in you tries to tell you or tries to make you do. So if you're doubting a program, like, and you have all these buts and reasons not to do it, apparently a force in you is pushing you so hard, because otherwise you wouldn't even think about it. If you have 10 reasons not to do it, then just don't do it. If you have 10 reasons not to do it and you're still looking at it, apparently there's a real reason to do it. So just do it.
That is a very good advice. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. It was wonderful chatting with you today.
Thank you so much too.